Made for This is a perk in Dead by Daylight that's barely been out for 6 months. And already it has become arguably one of the most talked about perks in DBD's history. It is insane how much controversy this one singular perk has caused for a very, very simple effect, very easy to understand effect, but people have very different interpretations of this perk. I honestly am sick of the arguments over who's right, who's wrong, without any actual evidence in mind. So I figured I'd spend some time and actually try and establish the facts for myself. Just to be totally clear going into this, I personally am of the mindset that Made for This was too strong. Or at least before I did the research for this video, I stood firmly that I wouldn't run Made for This when playing Survivor, and I hated seeing it as a killer. But the question is this all a placebo? Am I imagining the strength of Made for This, or is it genuinely doing something? That's what we're going to try and find out today. That's what we're going to be discussing, and I hope you guys are coming into this with an open mind, as I am. And same goes with the comments. I'm going to read comments, and I'm going to try and respond to them in the most... I'm going to try to respond to them in the most sincere way possible. I want to use this video to cause a discussion, to make people think about this perk and whether or not it is too strong, whether or not it is in need of some changes, whether or not you are truly showing skill by using it, or if it's doing nothing. Let's show that. Let's finally figure that one out. Anyway, hi guys, I'm Bubbles, or Bubble Sensei in full. If you have been here before, you know I stream on Twitch, and I also have this YouTube channel. If you could sub to this, if you can follow over there, that would be a big help. Anyway, today we're talking about Made for This. I'll admit, the reason that I felt so spurred on by this is I go through the DBD Reddit. I constantly look through to see what's going on, what people are thinking about, and Made for This has been a big topic of conversation recently. And it's not just Reddit. My actual matches have been easily affected by Made for This as well. I personally like to play any killer across the board. And so that also includes playing some weaker killers who might have M1 abilities, they move with the basic 115% speed, and I personally, at least in my experience, feel like Made for This makes those matches with those killers difficult to impossible. But the thing is that there's other people who have different experiences, and I don't think many people have actually taken the time to properly test it, to properly see if Made for This is doing anything to change the game, or whether or not it is just doing nothing. So, to do this, I actually decided to lean into my sensei element. If you didn't know, I'm studying to be a teacher, so I actually genuinely made a PowerPoint. Okay, so here's my PowerPoint. I have designed it as teachery as possible because I feel like that's just a fun little side note. Again, to reiterate, I am studying teaching. I have sensei in my usernames and stuff, so you know, I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with that. But anyway, this is about Made for This, and in turn, having a discussion about Old Dead Hard as well, and comparing those to normal running speeds. So I just want to set some ground rules before we get started. I'm looking at Made for This specifically. I am well aware that Otstava recently released a video talking about how you shouldn't be running perks like Made for This and Hope and stuff all together in one build. But that's talking a lot about stacking everything into one. And I feel like when you do that, when you talk about Made for This in relation to Hope, in relation to Resilience, in relation to Dark Theory, and many other perks, it can then lead to discussions about whether or not haste effects should stack. And that's not what I want to do. I want to genuinely break down whether or not Made for This is a problem in its current form, on its own. If I just played a game using Made for This, nothing else, is it too strong? Is it making chases unfair? I also wanted to highlight the fact that this video isn't focusing on the endurance element of Made for This. I'm well aware that Made for This has an element where if you heal somebody, you'll gain 10 seconds of endurance. I don't care. That isn't an element of this perk I'm really worried about. In my opinion, it's a really fun idea for a perk. When I was doing the recording for some of the gameplay elements of this video, I actually got some value out of the endurance effect. And I can't lie, it was good. I actually really like the idea of it as a perk on its own in isolation. The issue is the other element, which gives you a bonus 3% to your movement speed while you're injured. This is the part I want to focus on. This is the part that leads to discussions in the community, that leads to arguments and complaints about the perk. So I'm not focused on the endurance part. We're focusing entirely on the haste effect. For starters, I figured, let's just draw a table and show the difference between Made for This distance and normal running distance. To do this table, it was relatively simple. I just wanted to figure out how many seconds you needed to be running for to get a meter of value out of Made for This, how many seconds you needed to run to get 2 meters of value, so on. And this is essentially what we're seeing here. So if you pay attention to the running distance of survivors without Made for This, which is in the middle column here, it takes 8.3 seconds for them to get 33.3 meters. If you had Made for This, you would make it an extra meter. Obviously, once you hit double this time at 16.6 seconds, you'll then gain an extra 2 meters off of running Made for This. And so on to 25 seconds, where you'll gain a bonus 3 meters. As you can imagine, 100 meters would then be 103 meters. So, obviously, the first question is, how does this relate to All Dead Hard? So anyone who played Dead by Daylight previously knows that All Dead Hard was also very controversial. Dead Hard gave you a 0.5 second dash in which you would have high frames, so if the killer tried to hit you, you wouldn't be hit through it, and you'd also gain a little bit of distance. The problem I found in recording this video is that there wasn't really a big consensus on how far Dead Hard took you, and part of the problem is that the rate of change for a lot of the distance stuff is cubic, and it's very complicated, and it's changing all the time. It's not like a linear change. So I use the numbers on the wiki to try and figure out an average speed at various stages of Dead Hard to create a number. A number that basically represents to me how much distance you're gaining out of Dead Hard. And in this case, I figured that out to be 1.835 meters. Now you can pause the video so you can see how I worked it out. It might be a little bit confusing, but all my working out's on here. It should all make sense. So then, obviously, my question was, if Dead Hard adds up to 1.835 meters of extra distance, how does this relate to Made for This? I figured I better figure out roughly how many seconds it would take to reach that Dead Hard threshold. And using the same strategy as I did before to make the earlier table, I created a new table. This table has 2 values on it that I mainly want to focus on, so they're the ones that are on the screen right now. And they show what happens when you reach 15 seconds of running and 16 seconds of running, with and without Made for This, respectively. What you'll notice is that once you hit 15 seconds, you get 1.8 meters of extra distance by running Made for This. Shortly after that would be when you hit the Dead Hard range of 1.835 meters, which means that Dead Hard is somewhere close to 15, but between 15 and 16 seconds of run distance. So if you run for that long, you don't stop, that's how much extra distance you're going to make. In short chases, All Dead Hard was stronger. In those immediate situations where you don't really have much distance away from the killer, or you don't have much warning, Dead Hard is going to be the kingmaker. It's going to, or it would have, allowed you to last longer. However, if the chase lasts longer than 15 seconds, Made for This is stronger. By 15 seconds, Made for This will do the exact same thing as Dead Hard. Beyond that, it will just keep growing in power. So, with that in mind, with more context of how it relates to Dead Hard, I feel like it's important to talk about the Made for This on its own. How much extra distance is it giving us to normal running speed? And I decided that the most easiest way for me to see that would be to graph the rate of change. Now, a few notes about the upcoming graphs. Red is going to show the survivors' distance over time when they're not running Made for This. So this means that they're moving at 100% speed, according to the game files, which is 4.0 meters per second. Blue shows the survivors' distance over time using Made for This. So they'll be at 103% speed, which is 4.12 meters per second. Green and purple show the killer distance over time. Green is going to show the 115 killers, the ones that move at 4.6 meters per second, and purple will show the 4.4 meters per second or 110 killers. I'll just quickly talk about it because some of you may not have done graphing at a high school level in a while. But basically, we're going to be using the simple equation of y equals mx plus c. That is a simple linear graph that will just be a straight line. And in it, it's going to have y, which represents the distance made while running. X will represent the time spent running in seconds. M will show the rate of change. So that might sound confusing, but it's just meters per second. So what we were talking about before with the 4.0 meters per second that a survivor moves, or 4.6 for a 115 killer, etc. C is probably the most confusing part of all, but in order to do this, I wanted to use C to show for survivors how much distance they start with away from the killer. So oftentimes in chase, a survivor is going to get injured from getting hit, so they'll make some distance. This is then going to represent that distance and show how long it takes for the killer to catch up to the survivor. As for the killer, the C is going to show the lunge distance. Because obviously this lunge distance is going to cut down the amount of distance that it's going to take for the killer to catch the survivor. Anyway, with that in mind, let's have a look at the graphs. So this is the graph regarding 115 killers. So that's the 4.6 meters per second killers. Now, as you can see, there are two dotted points on this graph. The first dotted point shows the point at which the killer would catch up to the survivor in red. So the survivor without Made for This. It shows that it would take about 15.8 seconds, which, and in total, they would have run a total distance of 78 meters. As for the survivor with Made for This, they would have gone up to 19 seconds, or 96 meters. And that might not seem like a great difference, especially on this graph where the lines are very, very similar to each other. But the key thing you've got to note is that extra 2 seconds is the 2 seconds it would take to get through a window, to get through a pallet, to do something to try and react to the killer trying to attack you. Maybe it'll be the new Dead Hard. But that little extra gap between the two means everything in a chase. I'm sure you guys have seen many examples of a Made for This survivor getting through a window or dropping a pallet in time that you would swear they don't have the time to do. But this makes sense. And this only gets worse the longer the chase goes. So therefore, if obviously this is with a 15-meter gap between the survivor and the killer, what if that number was bigger? This gap would be much more significant. And the same can be said for 110 killers. Now, obviously, something you got to remember about 110 killers is oftentimes they have a power to try and either catch up or a power that allows them to have some range attack. But assuming that they are trying to chase the survivor, maybe it's a huntress, they've run out of hatchets, this is the gap. Obviously, it is quite significant a difference. It would take 23 seconds to catch the survivor without Made for This. It would take a whopping 33 seconds to catch the survivor with Made for This. Something I'd also account for in this entire run is that perhaps the theoretical huntress was throwing hatchets through this. The survivor dodged them, and therefore they try and get that last little M1 to get them down. This gap is basically going to be the difference between needing to reload, needing to replan things out, maybe even needing to abandon the chase. And that is massive when you think about it. Obviously, though, it's really hard to visualize this on the graphs, so I found another way to try and visualize this, and that was actually queuing up for some matches using the same loadout for Survivor both times, playing on the same map, finding a very, very recognizable structure, and running it around it a few times. One time with Made for This, and one time without Made for This. For this, I decided to take myself to Grave of Glenvale, which is the Deathslingers map, better known as Dead Dog Saloon, and have a little bit of a run around the shack. Now, you'll note that I didn't run this overly optimally, but I tried to run it as best as I could. Keep in mind, I'm a 5,000 hour survivor, but I'm more used to running a shack when I'm getting chased. This was me just running more so to try and show identical pathing and how Made for This could create an extra window. I decided specifically to try and make this clip around 16 seconds because, as we said before, 16 seconds was about that sweet spot, 15 to 16 seconds, where we'd gain enough distance that it would be equivalent to all Dead Hard. And the fact of the matter is that if you watch this clip, you can kind of see the difference between the two. The one on the right is running Made for This and has made that little bit extra distance that if a killer was behind them, they'd get that pallet drop. The only difference is that Dead Hard would have required a manual activation, whereas Made for This is active automatically. Not to mention that Dead Hard, you would have activated it, you would have gotten the pallet down, and that would have bought you extra time, which is great. And I can't really fault that. That's awesome. The issue is that Made for This doesn't deactivate at this point. Made for This is going to keep going, and one of the biggest issues with Made for This currently is the fact that it has such a weak deactivation criteria. The deactivation of criteria for Made for This is that you have to be exhausted. Getting exhausted while not running exhaustion perks is not going to happen often. A lot of the killers that do have exhaustion add-ons already are the killers that can probably handle a Made for This survivor anyway. And I find this all ridiculous because ultimately Made for This is a perk that Nurse is going to be able to handle, Blight's going to be able to handle, Huntress is going to be able to handle, Trickster will be able to handle. A lot of those higher tier killers are going to be able to deal with it. Who's not going to be able to handle it? It's your pigs, it's your legions, it's those killers that are sitting low tier who move at a normal speed, but they don't have a chase power that allows them to get that easy hit in to try and down somebody. Suppose the question is, where does this leave us? And I think ultimately Made for This has proven to me through this to be strong. I already was pretty sure that it was a strong perk, but this has reaffirmed my viewpoint. And if you disagree with me in the comments, I would love for you to tell me why you disagree in the comments. But ultimately, the fact of the matter is that this perk isn't going to be a game changer until it's a match with a killer who already is on the back foot, who is already having to work their arse off to get the win. And I don't think that's fair. We established in this video that it makes the same distance and arguably more distance than Dead Hard would. And I get that this isn't in the most realistic situation. Looking at a graph, that person's probably running straight. But that is also why I showed the shack example, because that little example was a short little thing that many people would be able to do in chase very, very simply. And we could see that little bit of extra distance that was made was enough to be the make or break of a window vault or a pallet drop. Honestly, Made for This needs a rework. I actually would be totally fine if they removed the haste thing entirely and then maybe just buff the endurance effect a bit more. I don't think people are going to be happy with that, but if that wasn't the way they took it, there are other ways to nerf it. You could take away the haste element of it. You could maybe make it so that it makes you permanently exhausted, and then you get that haste bonus, so that way people can't run Dead Hard as a backup. You could have speed caps to try and make sure it can't stack with Hope or any other haste effects, but that doesn't really solve the base problems regarding Made for This. But ultimately, if you wanted to nerf it, and you were dead set on keeping the haste effect on it, the best way would be to give it a very clear, concise, and easy to trigger deactivation criteria. Because currently, getting exhausted isn't enough. There needs, if you are going to give a survivor a haste effect like this, there needs to be some sort of downside, something that stops survivors from getting an unbelievable amount of value out of this perk. Whether that be maybe when you do a fast vault or a pallet drop, it ends the Made for This. That would put it more in line with All Dead Hard, but that is still a nerf. That's still something that we could potentially work with. I like what they were trying to do with this perk, but behavior recently has been hooked on haste status effects. You'll notice it with the rework for Skull Merchant. You'll notice it by the fact that pretty much every killer that we've had released recently has had haste add-ons and haste perks. Survivors as well. Many of the survivors have got haste status effects related to their new perks. But yeah. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'm probably going to try and post this one out there on Reddit as well, just to try and get more eyes to this, get more people thinking critically about this perk. Because I think this is a genuine discussion that we need to have. This is a genuine topic that behavior needs to have a look at. Because the fact of the matter is that when we just look at numbers, when we just look at very isolated examples, it's very easy to dismiss it. But the fact of the matter is, Made for This is changing the landscape of Dead by Daylight matches in a similar way to how All Dead Hard worked. It is removing a lot of the skill element from Survivor, where a lot of loops are based around them playing optimally and making the right decisions, the right mind games to try and make the killer whiff or to make the killer double back. But in this scenario where haste effects are just rampant, specifically with Made for This, it's not like that. Loops are super safe. They can do an extra run around the loop and still feel reasonably confident that they're going to make it back around. And that's a problem for killers that are already weak. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. Be friendly to everybody about everything. I want critical and creative discussions. I want us to be problem solvers, not problem creators. But with that said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay safe. Have a good week. Don't use Made for This, I don't think. In the meantime, if you're a survivor, maybe don't be that person that runs it all the time. But yeah, you know, obviously. I can't control you. I hope I'm swaying you a little bit on opinions. But yeah, bye-bye!